My name is Bernard Lafayette Jr. I'm a native of Tampa, Florida. I went to Milton Senior High School and went on to American Baptist College in Nashville, Tennessee. As a result of being in Nashville doing the sit-ins, I joined in with John Lewis and Jim Bevel and others, and we began to experiment with the whole idea of using nonviolence in desegregating the downtown lunch counters. As a result of that, we thought that this would be a great idea, following the leadership of Martin Luther King and his example, that we could do a lot more. So when the Freedom Rides started in 1961, we joined the Freedom Rides, and we continued to give contribution in the movement. Then I realized that we were students, but I thought, well, since we've done all this and accomplished as much as we did with students, why not take time off, like the Peace Corps or Vista Volunteer, for a couple of years out of college, and devote full time to the movement. So I was looking for an assignment, and I finally ended up in Selma, Alabama. So there were a number of us who were assigned to different places to start the voter registration movement. Bob Moses in Mississippi, Charles Sherrod in Southwest Georgia, Bill Hanson in Arkansas, and they had scratched Selma off the map because they had sent people down there, two teams of SNCC workers, who came back and decided that nothing could be done because the white folks were too mean and the black people were too afraid.
Now,
So
you was bold enough to take that on. Tell me about this man, Charles Sherrod, who was bold enough to take on Albany.
Charles Sherrod had been involved in the sit-in movement, and so therefore he already had experience in direct action, and we had also made a commitment. We, some of the SNCC people who came out of the organization in 1960 when we formed SNCC in Raleigh, North Carolina. Charles Sherrod and I had a lot in common in terms of our being in the ministry and also embracing nonviolence. And we decided that what we were going to do was to go ahead and devote our time and energy to helping to continue to bring about changes. Most important change at this point was the voter registration, because we had large numbers of people who were not registered to vote. The very night that we left Atlanta, Georgia, we decided that we were going to go ahead and move forward in the voter registration campaign. And what is interesting is that that day, in fact, happened to have been the date that the ICC ruling went into effect. The Interstate Commerce Commission had ruled that desegregation of interstate travel could no longer be segregated. And it was that very same night before that Sherrod went to Southwest Georgia. It so happened that he was taking public transportation out of Atlanta, and he decided to use the white facility when he arrived in Albany. Now, the ruling went into effect November 1st. It was shortly after midnight that he arrived in Albany, and he was arrested. And we were at the Butler Street Y, that is the fellows who were in SNCC, who were in Atlanta at the time, and we were called and told that Sherrod had been arrested and that we should go down, since it was in Georgia already, to the Atlanta bus station. And we went down to Atlanta bus station, and we went into the white eating place, the lunch counters, and we were arrested. I remember distinctly that I was arrested in Atlanta, November 1st, 1961.
Man, where did you and Brother Charles get the kind of true grit that it took for you to make up your mind to take on the establishment and their police the people?
Well, I haven't said it this way before, but what had happened is that we had changed. In order to bring about change, it's important for the people to change. And we had decided that we ourselves had made a change, and we wanted to see change, not only in the system, but we wanted to see change in the people.
In you guys' discussions and planning, though, how did you deal with the fear factor?
We recognize that fear is always a reality. The question is whether or not you have more courage than fear, whether fear controls or dominates, or whether courage dominates. And while we were aware and very conscious of the fact that we could lose our lives, so therefore, instead of having our lives taken from us, we decided we were going to give our lives. And once you give your life to a cause, a worthy cause, something that you're willing to die for, then death no longer becomes a factor in making
Do you
decisions.
have any sense of what inspired Brother Charles to be that strong and to stand with you guys instead of doing what a lot of blacks will do today? When you start cropping up problems, they start getting out of town.
Well, we decided to go where the problem exists because we believed in change. And we understood that there were some people who would be dominated by fear. So we had to be that example. Part of the strategy is demonstrating to people on a personal level how you overcome injustice and discrimination. And we also help people to understand that you could not be yourself completely if you did not stand against the system. But more than anything else, you become the example. What happened in Southwest Georgia with Charles Sherrod was that he was that example and that model, and he demonstrated that even by going into Albany, Georgia, and using a segregated lunch counter, even though the law had changed. And that's what we're talking about. Even if the law changes, if people don't change, then change has not occurred. Now, one of the important contributions of the Albany movement, and some, criticize it and say it didn't accomplish anything. That's, just was a lot of demonstrations and things, but it didn't make any difference on a national level. And I have to say, that Martin Luther King had some questions about it. It's in his writings about it, and he and I didn't agree on it. What happened, even in Chicago, there were a large number of ministers and others who left Chicago on a bus after Charles Sherrod was arrested and Martin Luther King went to Albany. They actually took a bus all the way from Chicago to Albany, Georgia. When they returned after being in jail, these ministers left and went to jail in Albany. And that was one of the good examples that was set for the rest of the movement.
That's what I was just about to ask you. Wasn't that the laying of the foundation for the guts and the strategy and etc. for the other major movements that happened, such as in Selma?
Exactly. And what happened is that those ministers returned from Albany, Georgia, jail, and start mobilizing and organizing in Chicago. David Jensen was kind of secretary to the ministers group, and he's the one that made the arrangements for him to get the bus and that sort of thing. And those ministers then began to look at the issues in their own communities. Even Chicago, which was thought to be, the land of the free, whatever, up north, so to speak, where you didn't have these kind of problems. But they began to look around to see what kind of problems did they have. And they began to now put on their lens and see the slums of Chicago and the discrimination that took place. So it inspired them. Albany served to inspire people all over the country. And they went to the Albany movement, but they came back changed with a new set of lens.
What do you say to Charles today, man to man?
I would say to Charles that we are very proud of the contribution that he's made. And I'm glad that he's here today to witness the appreciation that people have for him and what he's done. We were so much alike in many ways in those days as young people. We had a, you might say, faith commitment as well, since we both were young ministers, Protestants, and we shared that. And our source of inspiration and our values came directly from our Holy Scriptures. And we were able to draw from those Scriptures, and we shared that in common. The other thing I want to say is that that movement produced some of the greatest talent that you can imagine in the Freedom Singers, for example, and Bernice Reagan, and all the others who, Ruthie, and others who joined in, and they began to form a singing group that was legendary. We had the first debut for the Freedom Singers in Chicago at the Area Crown Theater, McCormick Place. We were raising money to get people out of jail, some of our stick workers in Louisiana. And Harry Belafonte supported them and bought cars for them and made other arrangements for them to have opportunity to travel and be exposed. The contribution that came out of that movement that Charles Sherrod started was preeminent, and it really was worldwide when you think about it. And it may not have the results of making national change per se, because it was not a specific issue. I know that Martin Luther King believed that one of the reasons why the Albany movement does not get the national recognition of the changes that were made there is because it was not a single issue. And we agree with him to that extent. But we have to think about the other things that that Albany movement contributed. And the leadership that Charles Sherrod gave made all the difference in the world. We have got to find a way, and nonviolence is the way, to help people realize that they too have a responsibility, and it's their movement as well. Because a lot of people don't realize it, and my final statement is this. When the rule said that blacks had to sit in the back of the bus, the rule also said that whites had to sit in the front of the bus. Whites were not free to sit wherever they wanted to, when they wanted to. So that long back seat on the bus was reserved for black only. So when you discriminate against one person or one group of people, you automatically impose some restrictions on the rest of the people.